everyone, welcome to Digging In. We have been walking through understanding personalities, looking at the MAD personalities, and we have today a camel extraordinaire. Now, I am talking about the real deal, guys. So we want you to listen in and learn from Mariah Jarrett, who is our business development lead. She's got a lot to teach us on today about camels. So Mo, thank you for being with us.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited.
So this camel, let me tell you, she makes the list of lists, and she knows how to make things happen. So let's pick her brain on describe a camel, help us understand what a camel is from a camel. So that's what we're doing, a camel, understand a camel from a camel's perspective. So give us some good insight on a camel. No.
Absolutely. So you mentioned lists. I wish I had a list to tell you all of the things about being a camel, but I'd love to talk through some of those things. So yes, we love the list. We love the detail. Change is hard for us. Change makes us feel uncomfortable, uneasy, and causes us a lot of stress and anxiety. But as far as structure, details, that is the strength in our wheelhouse. We love those details.
And it's just natural, isn't it? I mean, it's just your brain processes in that structure and formulating, a process, the details, all those things. It happens naturally, right?
It sure
just
does.
like breathing.
Yes, it does. It's very, very natural for us. That's just how our brains are wired. That's how we process things. That's how we think through things. That's how we analyze things. So that's our process through and through.
So talk to us about, that's important to a camel, and it's really what they value. They value those things as well. Talk to us though, and help us understand what makes you feel validated. So what are some specifics, some details around what makes you feel validated as a camel?
Absolutely. So something for me personally that helps me feel validated is when I have been working on a big project or a task, and I've spent a lot of time organizing it, putting those details together, revising, making sure everything is detailed and organized as possible. And then I take that project or that task to somebody else, and they're reviewing it. Maybe we need to have a follow-up conversation, and I go to meet with that person. The most validating feeling for me is when that person has spent the time to read through, see all those details. They remember those details so that when I'm sitting down with them, they say, oh, Mariah, I love this portion right here that you consider this detail, that you had blah, blah, blah on here. That is the best feeling in the world for a camel, is that someone else cared enough about all those details to remember and then talk to me about those.
So I heard you say that they've studied before, they've looked at it, they've spent the time that you have invested time into it, so they value that time piece, and they remember details and facts about the project or the work that you've done.
Correct, because all of those details are in the front of my mind. So it makes me feel very, very good and validated when I'm sitting with someone who has all of those details in their mind as well.
So let's pick Mo's brain a little further, because she brings such value to us in understanding camels. So let's look at that piece at home. So let's say at home, how do you get validated as a camel at home? What does that look like? Is it a little different than what you say at work and projects, or is it similar? What would you say?
I would say it's a little different. At home, I've got 2 small children, so the details and the organization that I like to have at home is very different than the organization I have while I'm here working. So it is very different. I have to kind of dial back my camels a little bit. I have to kind of loosen those expectations and kind of bring them down a little bit. So it is a little bit different for me at home versus, in a professional environment.
Wise mama, very wise mama. And Mo does a beautiful job in setting up a schedule and structure for her kids, and I get to have some insight into that sometimes. So let's talk about how camels communicate. Okay, so how do they communicate? And also, just thinking a little further, how do they like to be communicated to? So we know those go hand in hand. So help us understand, how do you communicate to others, and how do you like to be communicated to as a camel?
So in a perfect world, I would love to get all of my communication in little boxes, spreadsheet, bullet points, list. That would be my desired method to consume all of my communication. But the world doesn't operate that way, and that's just not possible. So I recognize that. So if I'm in a meeting and I'm gathering notes and, having dialogue with somebody else, I take my notes, and then in that moment, I'm kind of flexing my EQ muscle to just roll with it and capture as many notes as I can in that moment, however those details are given to me. And then I love to, after that, I like to take my notes and then I put them in my boxes. I take them, organize
Your
them in
system.
I put them in a system that works for me, that is efficient for me, so that I'm able to, in a very detailed way, fulfill those action items in the right order. If there's deadlines, time frames that I need to follow, I put all that into a package that is easy for me to operate in.
So you have your own system.
I do.
That organizes your thoughts and organizes your timelines. Now, you said EQ. So camels have EQ, and they can have EQ. A lot of times we think of camels as very tactical, below the line, if we speak to that. But camels can be able to take their information that they exchange, put it into their system. So you mentioned that, Mo. That's such a good insight, that you allow information to come in through a meeting, through checkpoints, whatever is going on logistically. You take in that information. It sounds like you're getting outside your camel zone just a little bit, so you can receive information. Not receiving it immediately, processing or sticking it in boxes in your mind, but you're trying to listen and be open. So that's great insight. So when you communicate to others, do you find that you're using EQ to communicate a little differently to them, or do you find that you're communicating as a camel? What would you say?
So I would say that I really have grown in my EQ strength and being able to communicate to others. I wasn't always that way. I used to always present and communicate in my camel ways to everybody until I was very aware that all those details given to a lion, they're may not even look at them. It's just too much, and they're just going to blow by them. The details just may not be received in the same way that I feel that they're important to me. So especially here with people that I've worked with for a long time, and I know how they receive information, I try to be as quick as possible to give them information in a way that they receive. An example in email communication, if I'm emailing a group we've got some lions in the group, we've got some turtles, we've got some monkeys, I'll even structure my email. I'll put line notes at the top, and this is usually 1 or 2 sentences. Then I'll say camel details if you like to read them, and then there's however many pages could be of details included. So I try to tailor my communication based on the people that are receiving the communication as best as I can.
And she does a beautiful job at that. And I have watched you just strengthen that muscle and grow muscle there. And you said it's not been natural. You learned that. That's very, very neat to know. We can do that. We can flex and learn other skills. So let's talk about conflict. So how do camels handle conflict? This is coming from a true camel. Help us know what's going on internally and externally. How do you handle conflict?
Well, so camels handle conflict, I think, in 2 ways. In some ways, camels kind of fuel conflict. In other ways, I think camels also can help in conflict situations. So let me maybe talk about how we can fuel conflict sometimes. As we talked earlier, we are very detail oriented, and sometimes in a conflict situation, we want to over process those details. That's not helpful. Oftentimes, or we get kind of a silo mentality. We put our little blinders on, and it prevents us from seeing or hearing other people's thoughts or feelings or perspectives because we're over here in our camel lane and we're just focused on what we have right in front of us, the details that we feel are important to us, and we're not paying attention to things happening around us. I think the way we feel, we're sometimes not very agile. We're not willing to be flexible. And then oftentimes camels, we like to have the last word, and that does not help in a conflict situation. So I think those components, I think, can be not very good for conflict situations. Camels, I think we can be helpful in conflict situations. I think we can bring some logic to conversations. Maybe when people are frustrated or upset, we can help bring some order. We can bring some structure. We can maybe help others to kind of slow down. Think of a lion who's just ready to go and they're upset and they're just going super fast. We can say, hey, wait, slow down. Hey, let's break this down if we can. Let's slow down for a second and look at these different components of what the situation is and what this conflict is.
I think there's so much wisdom in being aware, all personalities, how do we fuel conflict? That's a great concept. That you've made us think about a different angle, that we all fuel things with our personality at times. A personality has strengths, and then we have some Achilles heels. And so, we can fuel that or we can help it. Great insight. I think in a camel perspective, as you were describing, those camels have to understand where that other person is. Because if that camel brings logic at the wrong time, or let's say just not at the most appropriate time, let's say that other person is in an emotional mind, right? I mean, they are frustrated and they're letting you know. Let's say they're a monkey or a lion, or let's say they're a turtle or another camel and they're internalizing it all. A camel, if they can be aware of maybe where that person is, they can hold logic to the more appropriate time. Because I do think logic is a gift. I do think that it's bringing that to a conversation, slowing down the process to look at the steps, look at what's missing, look at, maybe we skipped a couple of pieces that were very important in the process. And so great insight. Goodness, we could learn from that to know that, how do we fuel it? And how can we help it? Because there's two ends to that conflict. So thank you for that. So you've talked about, as a camel, kind of some of the pieces of how you process. But I'd love for us to go back to that for another minute and for you to give us insight, because there is a pattern. There's a pattern to how camels process things, and they need to work that. They need to be able to have that rhythm and work that pattern and to be in their best spot to process something. But help us break that down for us. How do camels process things?
Yes, absolutely. So let's use the analogy of we're trying to work on a project. Okay, we need to be able to process through this project. What camels need, we need to have a solid baseline or foundation, something to start before we can dive into a project. If we start that project maybe without that foundation there, we get very, very worried, we get very stressed, we get very anxious, and we aren't able to create a solid path forward without that baseline foundation to start off with. And then oftentimes if that's not in place, the whole timeline of that project isn't quite right. There's things that are missed. We end up having to double back and do some things over again because we didn't have that base to start off with, or all the details and information we needed to start.
That is so important, because as a lion is they're figuring things out as they go, right? They don't really have to have that baseline. They just need to go and start learning, figuring it out, deciding if this works, this doesn't work, that kind of thing. But that doesn't work for a camel. A camel really needs to kind of get themselves orderly, organized in their thinking, pull together some information on the situation. I love what you call that, a baseline. They need to establish this baseline. And when they have that baseline, then they can move forward with their confidence to be able to process it, right?
Correct. Yeah, without that baseline, and we're still trying to work because we still want to do a good job and we'll do the best of our ability, even without that baseline, that's when we start having a little camel fit. So that's what we do. We get upset. Sometimes we get paralyzed. We're like, oh, we can't do this. Or, we start getting moody. We get moody because we didn't have what we needed at the start. So that's going to affect our mood through the whole process till we get to the end. And that's kind of one of the pitfalls of our camel personality.
That's good information. That is really good information for all of us to understand. Because there are times where, others may not be able to read what's going on, but all those things are going on internally. If we have a stronger EQ and we recognize that those are things that take place internally, then we can read a little deeper than what we're seeing on the outside. Because if we're just looking on the outside, we might miss it. But to understand this is who a camel is and this is what they need. And if they have these things, then it just helps them be able to process things better and move forward. So Mo, as we finish up, maybe give us one more thing about a camel that we need to know that's helpful for all of us. What would that be?
Yeah, so I mentioned a second ago how we can get kind of moody and we're just real stringent, kind of just stuck in our little ways. But despite that, we really, really care. We are very deeply passionate about what we're doing. And what we do is very, very important to us. And we strive to do it to the best of our abilities. We want everything to be excellent. We would love for everything to be perfect, but we just can't do that. So that, still one of our weaknesses, but we are very deeply passionate. We very, very much care about what we're doing. And we, that's just who we are.
So listen to that. You're not going to see that on the outside necessarily. Sometimes we might miss that. And we might think that, it's an actually different perspective, but it's important. That's a great last thought for us, to make sure we understand that there's a lot of care that goes on behind those details. There's a lot of passion that goes on behind those details, because you want to do a good job and you want to do things excellently and you want it to help others. So you've given us a lot of things to think about today and a lot of valuable insight. And I really appreciate you, first of all, as a camel, and I appreciate you sharing your thoughts with us today. So thank you. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
So we want to challenge you to take this, process it, think about it. You've got some camels in your life. We know you do. And this is valuable information that you can use in those relationships that you lead, that you invest in, and those that you love. And so take this and use it so that you can make a difference.
To learn more about the concepts from this video, you can find Dr. Larry Little's book, Crossing the Line, available to purchase on Amazon and our website, eaglecenterforleadership.com. You can also find the podcast, Crossing the Line with Larry Little, available on Apple Podcast, Spotify, or online at eaglecenterforleadership.com. Thank you for watching.